Yeah,
Yes.
you did a very
Yes.
brilliant presentation. So thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. We're indeed honored to
Thank
have you.
you.
Now, Melinda is an international lawyer, an attorney at law in Guyana, a former oil lawyer. She has been an outspoken critic deal with ExxonMobil and the danger it poses to the government, to the Guyanese people. Melinda was legal counsel on a recent case which successfully challenged Exxon's environment permits, and she managed to have them reach term from 20 years to 5 years. It was a great success for the Guyanese people. Um, Melinda is there, great. So I'll be now and we'll just listen to you, Melinda. Really welcome. I'm not, yeah, so please speak to us.
Well, thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. And first of all, apologies for the problems with the sound. I'm actually now using two computers, so I hope that this is going to work. As Luke said, I'm a lawyer and I oppose oil production. I oppose the Guyana's oil production. I want to make it clear from the beginning that I don't have any political allegiance. I'm independent of all of the political parties. I'm not connected to any of them. And the reason I oppose the oil, which incidentally the parties support, both of them, both main parties support the oil, I don't, because the oil is going to make Guyana poorer, not richer. Poorer, not richer. And that is a betrayal of Guyana's working people, because they are going to pick up the bill, not the rich. They're going to be all right, thank you. So what I want to do is to start by just giving you a brief overview of Guyana. Some people know this already, so bear with me. Others maybe would be happy to have a little bit of an update. So I'll do a brief overview, and then I will explain why this oil deal is a betrayal of Guyana's working people. So just a little bit of context. Guyana, as you know, is a South American country, 83,000 square miles, and it's a very rich country. Gold, diamonds, bauxite, timber, agriculture. It's also a carbon sink. So it's a country that has everything going for it. Unfortunately, the people are poor. So the country is rich, but the people are poor. And successive governments have done very little for the people in Guyana. Successive governments have done very little for the working people. Guyana has really been dominated by two parties. The PPP, Civic, which is the party that is now in government, and the PNC, the People's National Congress, which is now part of a larger grouping called a Partnership for National Unity. And that includes the Working People's Alliance, which joined with the PNC to form part of the a Partnership for National Unity. And in my view, that was a betrayal of Walter Rodney. The Independent Commission of Inquiry, which investigated Rodney's assassination. Dr. Rodney was assassinated on the 13th of June, 1980. The Independent Commission of Inquiry said that there was very strong evidence that the state was responsible for his assassination. So for his party, and the government at the time was the PNC. The Partnership for National Unity and the AFC have formed a coalition, and the AFC was formed out of people who left the PNC. So for example, Raphael Trotman, people who left the PPP, for example, Kemraj Ramjatan, they formed the AFC, and then they joined back with APNU to form the APNU AFC coalition. So it's the same people over and over and over. We have a saying in Guyana, wanting over and over, and that is a bit like what the politics ends up being. Historically, there have been attempts to divide Guyana by race, from the colonial planters onwards to politicians today. I'm going to sound a note of caution here, and to say that if you look at Guyana through the prism of race, it really becomes an intellectual prison. Race is used as a tool to distract attention from the day-to-day injustice and exploitation of the poor and the powerless in Guyana. And that is irrespective of what race you are. The poor and the powerless in Guyana suffer day-to-day exploitation and injustice, irrespective of which party is in government. I never say in power. They have no business being in power. When you're in government, you serve the people, you don't wield power. And irrespective of what race you are, if you're poor and powerless in Guyana, you are going to suffer injustice every single day. And we resent being categorized according to our race. Guyanese are very nice people. We're very kind people. We look after one another. And then for people to tell us, oh, but you all are divided by race, really flies in the face of everything that we are trying to do to build the country and to find justice and equality for everybody. Dr. Rodney, of course, exposed the class divisions and the injustice of class and the exploitation of the working people. And that was one of the reasons for his assassination. So oil is a betrayal of the working people. It will make Guyana poorer, not richer. Why will it make it will make Guyana poorer financially, economically, and environmentally? Let's just take a quick look at the oil deal. First of all, this is a production sharing agreement. When people say Guyana is going to get money, bear in mind that Guyana is getting a cut of the oil. Guyana then sells the oil, and then Guyana will get some money for selling the oil. But Guyana also has to pay people to sell the oil, so Guyana gets a bit less. Guyana has absolutely no idea how to sell oil. We're not an oil-producing nation. We know nothing about oil. And we're coming into a market when everybody else is leaving. That just shows you how little we know about the oil industry. Essentially, this is a deal of free oil for the oil companies. So there are 3 small offshore companies. We talk about ExxonMobil because it's convenient to use the parent company for the operator. But essentially, there are 3 small companies registered in the Bahamas, and 1 in Barbados, and I think 1 in the Cayman Islands. And these are subsidiaries of Exxon, of Hess, and of CNOOC Nexen. So these 3 small companies are who Guyana has to deal with, and they have very little in the way of resources. Now, the oil comes out of the ground. Actually, it doesn't really come out of the ground. It's 120 miles offshore. The ocean is a mile deep. The oil is about another 2 miles below the seabed. That's where it's coming from, and that is extremely dangerous deep sea drilling. We don't know how much oil is there. Guyana has no way of checking, no personnel, no equipment, no drones, no nothing to check how much oil is there. So everything depends on the information that comes from the oil companies. Now, you may think that this is sensible, or you may think it is not very sensible for a sovereign state to take all of its information about this major asset from the people that are extracting it. The former advisor to the government, Jan Mangle, is on record as saying that the Guyanese people don't know anything about the oil industry and they should trust the oil companies. I obviously don't agree with that point of view at all, and I have urged people to subject this to as much scrutiny and challenge as possible. We don't know how much oil is there, but we do know what the oil companies tell us is there. We don't really know how much is extracted, but we do know what they tell us is extracted. We don't know how much it costs to take the oil out, but we do know what they tell us it costs to take the oil out. And that is roughly the structure of the deal. So you have the oil and it comes out. Now, before anything happens, the oil companies can take as much oil as they say they require for their operations. So that goes off the top. Then you've got some oil left. Out of that, every month, up to 75%, 3/4, the oil companies can take in order to pay off their expenses. So whatever money they've spent, they're going to get back. So every month they can take up to 75% of the oil to cover their expenses. And if that doesn't cover their expenses, they simply add it on to the next month and 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 so on. That leaves some more oil. Out of that, they take another 12.5%, and that's their profit. So they take a bit off the top, then they take 75% of what's left, then they take another 12.5%, and they go with that. What's left? Guyana now collects, because remember I said Guyana is getting a share of the production. Now Guyana's got no tankers, so Guyana's got to go. It's got to pay for that oil to be collected, pay for somebody to sell it. And at that point, Guyana will get some money. Guyana also gets a 2% royalty. So we say roughly Guyana gets 14.5% of the value of the oil, but that's, strictly speaking, that's not accurate. It's less than that, but it's a rough enough, good enough number that we can use. As you can see, this deal is very much in favor of the oil companies. In fact, it's so bad that even the IMF said it was favorable to the oil companies, and they recommended that Guyana didn't do this again. It's a giveaway of Guyana's oil, and it's going to bring Guyana with massive debt. I mentioned the expenses, and of course that covers everything. Now, I've already spoken at length about the expenses in this oil contract, so I'm not going to go through that again here. But if you want to know more about it, there is a presentation on the internet, it's about 15 minutes, where I go through the expenses in detail. Suffice it to say, it covers everything. The wells, the equipment, the pipes, the nails, the screwdrivers. Oh, if somebody wants to buy a laptop, we pay for it. If they go down the road and they want to go to the bar and they have a drink, we pay for it because Guyana pays for the recreation. They rent a house, Guyana pays for that. They give a donation, footballs, because they love to do this, of course. Love to make all these donations to every club that's going. Yeah, you get some footballs. Oh, I'll just add that to the bill, and so on and so forth. In effect, Guyana pays everything. This is not an investment. An investment means I take my money, I bring it, I spend it, I get a return. This is not an investment. This is the oil companies borrow money to do something. They charge that money back to Guyana. So Guyana pays back the capital and the interest. So there's no investment going on here. The working people of Guyana are subsidizing this. I say it's the working people subsidizing this because, of course, who does the oil belong to? It doesn't belong to the government. It's sitting out there in the Guyana's exclusive economic zone. We have sovereignty, which allows us to take that oil out. That means they've got to do it for the benefit of the people of Guyana, which is everybody, all 780,000 of us, not a few people. So far, of course, the Guyanese people are not seeing any benefits, unless you are lucky enough, privileged enough, successful enough to have a business and you are providing services or goods to the oil industry. Yes, then you will be making some money, but bear in mind, everything that you get paid comes out of the expenses, comes out of Guyana's share of the oil. So again, it's the poor that are subsidizing the rich. Perhaps you have a house and you're going to rent it. Well, that rent is charged back to Guyana, and that's taken out of Guyana's oil. So again, the poor are subsidizing the rich. There really is no investment, and it is absolutely a betrayal of the working people of Guyana. Now, we know governments don't really have much money. They get money from mostly from taxation. Now we're going to get a bit from oil, not that much, but I'll come back to that. So taxation is the thing that really governments get their money from. Well, in this arrangement, the oil companies don't pay any tax. No tax. Guyanese pay tax. Working people pay tax. Your security guards, our market vendors, our fishermen, our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, the public service, the police, the army, the fire service, the backbone of this country that is underpaid and overworked, the people that are struggling to make ends meet, struggling to give their children a pair of shoes and school books, they pay tax, but not Exxon, not Hess, not CNOOC Nexon, not these foreign companies. They pay no tax, no duty, nothing. That is a betrayal of the working people of Guyana. But let's add insult to injury. Not only do these oil companies not pay tax, the government, the minister, says they can get a tax credit. So part of the money that comes out from that Guyana will get from this oil will now go to the Inland Revenue and will count as if it's tax received from these oil companies, and they get a tax credit for it, and they go back to their tax authorities with this credit to say, look, here is the tax that we paid, when in fact they've paid absolutely nothing. And the money has just gone from Guyana's income into Guyana's revenue. So that too is a betrayal of the working people of Guyana. And I want to tackle head on this issue because really this deal is making Guyana poorer, not richer. People have been told a lie of vast wealth when in fact the reality is massive debt. The former minister who signed the agreement, Minister Trotman, promised people vast wealth. It's not there. Global Witness, some of you may know them, they're a British NGO based somewhere in East London, produced a report last year. They were asked not to do it and then told not to do it, but they still went ahead and did it. And in that report, they claimed that Guyana would get $168 billion from oil. $168 billion, which is a complete lie. They have since been told to withdraw that report, and apologize to the people of Guyana because they have been unable to justify their figures, unable to show their calculations, and they got the agreement wrong. In essence, this deal will bring Guyana very little money. I'm not saying there's no money, because obviously there will be some. There was, I think, roughly $185 million this year, but it's very little money, and it's not enough to cover the budget and put money into a sovereign wealth trust fund. There is an analysis done by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. They're based in New York. They're an independent global energy think tank. They've done an analysis of the contract and the finances on this Guyana deal, and their conclusion is there's not going to be enough money to cover Guyana's spending and to put some into the Sovereign Wealth Trust Fund. The Sovereign Wealth Trust Fund is another scandal because the law was signed by David Granger in January 2019. Our Constitution requires a law to be signed by the President before it can come into effect. Well, Mr. Granger was not President in January 2019 because there had been a no confidence motion in Parliament. So the Sovereign Wealth Trust Fund, the act that brings it into being, is unlawful. Doesn't meet the constitutional requirements. That's another issue that needs to be fixed. So we have the situation of very little money. The government is proposing to borrow on that, increase the debt. Well, who's going to pay off the debt? It's going to be a burden on this generation and future generations of working people. And the borrowing is not going to be spent on things that will help people. It's not going to be put into health and education. It's not going to be put into people's lives and people's future. It's being put into vanity projects. What do I mean by a vanity project? Well, let me give you an example of the most recent vanity project that's put on the table. And this is the idea to take the associated natural gas and bring it to shore. What is the associated natural gas? When they bring up the oil, there's some gas in there. SO, under the petroleum agreement, SO is to use that associated gas for its own purposes. It can sell it if it's got any commercial value. Otherwise, it's got to re-inject it back. They haven't been doing that. They put in faulty equipment, and they've been flaring gas for almost a year. Billions and billions of cubic feet of natural gas being flared, which is really bad for the environment, obviously, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and we're told other chemicals that possibly can cause cancer. What is the response to this? The government has come up with the idea to bring that gas to shore and to use it. The studies show that this will cost approximately $400 million to do the pipeline and some infrastructure. Well, that's twice as much as Guyana will be getting from oil, more than twice as much as Guyana will be getting from oil this year. And according to the Vice President, Barrett Jagdeo, this is the way to give the people of Guyana cheap electricity. $400 million on a pipeline, plus more money on infrastructure to bring natural gas to the shore, where it will only reach a limited number of Guyanese people. It won't cover the hinterland at all. So the debt for this is going to burden everybody, but only some people will benefit. And at this huge cost, we're told that's how we get cheap electricity. Let me flag here that it is part of the policy of the government of Guyana, or has been, to convert Guyana to renewable energy by 2025, and that is an international commitment that Guyana gave under the Paris Agreement in 2015. The idea was Guyana would do this if they got the money. There's no money for renewable energy, but suddenly there is plenty of money to bring gas to shore. Vanity project. And again, a problem for the working people who will end up having to pay off that burden. IEFA, the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, looked at this and concluded that this gas to shore project is likely to lead to financial bankruptcy for Guyana. So again, we see that the oil is going to make Guyana poorer, not richer, and that is going to be a disproportionate burden on the working people of Guyana, and in the very specific case of the gas to shore project, a disproportionate burden on people who live in the hinterlands. So, not much revenue, increasing debt. That's pretty bad. But it gets worse. We're told now that Guyanese should be looking for local content. The local content, which is the oil, really, has already been given away. But don't worry about that. Now we tell people, you can have some local content, you can get a job, you should be happy with the job. We've given away all the oil, and what little money we're getting, we're going to spend on vanity projects. But don't worry, y'all gonna be all right, y'all gonna get a job. Well, what jobs are we talking about? There aren't any. A drill ship has 300 to 400 people on it. That's high-tech work. There's no one that's going to be that is able to do that. So what are the jobs that are available? You want to wash some bottles, drudge something, clean out this? No. That's as far as local content will go for the working people. Remember, if you've got a business, you'll be supplying some goods and services, so you'll make some money and you'll get that back, and that will be taken out of Guyana, from Guyana's oil. But if you're working people, you're not getting anything. And that's the bulk of the country. Local content is really a scam. It's a way of distracting people's attention away from the exploitation of the country. So we have this deal, which gives Guyana some oil, which Guyana then sells, bringing in not much in the way of revenue. What little revenue there is, it looks as though it will be squandered on vanity projects, plus it will be used to leverage more borrowing. And this is at a time when oil has no future. Fossil fuels are on their way out. The oil industry is dying. It's probably dead, but it doesn't realize it. The only thing really keeping it going is the politicians. The market is moving away from oil. And there's a very big risk that Guyana's assets could become stranded assets. In fact, the Inter-American Development Bank has warned about the risk of stranded assets in Latin America and the Caribbean. While at the same time, incidentally, the Inter-American Development Bank is encouraging Guyana to do oil. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. In summary, though, that is an economic risk for Guyana. The risk of stranded fossil fuel assets, the wells that are out there that will need to be capped when the drilling stops. Guyana could well end up with those costs, and those costs are massive, millions and millions of American dollars. Exxon is in financial trouble. Then again, I would urge you to look at the IEFA report on Guyana, because they go into detail as to why Guyana's relationship with ExxonMobil is actually a cause for concern and not a guarantee of stable profits for the country. Look at this from a country perspective, it's extremely worrying. Financial risks from the contract, economic risk from stranded fossil fuel assets. And I just want to close off with the last issue, which is the environmental costs to the country, which again are borne disproportionately by working people. Greenhouse gas emissions, you don't need me to tell you. Climate change, global warming. We are facing an existential crisis. Vice President Jagdeo has himself said that this is an existential crisis. President Ali has said that it's here, climate change is here already, as has the former president, Brigadier David Granger. So the politicians know that Guyana is going to face a very, very difficult future as a result of, we used to call it global warming, but I think that's become unfashionable, but basically a very uncertain future because of excess greenhouse gas emissions, which are causing climate change, ocean acidification, as the excess carbon dioxide is absorbed by the oceans, and of course, rising sea levels. Well, when your capital city is below sea level, doing something that contributes to rising sea levels is not a sensible thing to do. In fact, it's lunacy. Most of Guyana's wealth is on the coast. Most of it is in the low-lying coastal areas. A lot of people's homes are there. And when that sea comes over the wall, and it's doing it, we're getting a lot of flooding. We're getting flooding that we've never seen before. It affects everybody. The sea doesn't care what race you are. The sea doesn't care what political party you voted for. It just comes over the wall. And that's what we know. We know we are all in this together. We know that we are going to have to come together to deal with these issues. And that the oil is a distraction, that the oil is a betrayal of the working people of this country, and that it will make Guyana poorer, not richer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melinda, for that comprehensive analysis and conversation about oil in Guyana. There's so many questions, and I hope that people will put those in the chat. Let me check. Can you hear? Can you hear us now, Melinda?
Yes, I can.
Good. I see a shake of
Thank
it.
you so much.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. That's fantastic. Now, there's just so many questions, so many notes I've been making, and I think I don't know whether to be really pessimistic or optimistic about possible what might come out of this meeting and changes that need to happen as regards Guyana. As your final remarks clearly said, we're below sea level. Georgetown has been flooding for a very long time, and we know the seas are rising. We know this oil will contribute to making the world warmer and compounding our problems in Guyana. But on the other hand, now this oil has started producing. Political parties support and embrace the oil, and probably the population also think that oil is a good idea, because most people, when they hear oil, they think wealth and riches. So what do we do to educate the masses, and how do we confront and combat this? And how do you see, how do we go about changing the view that the population has about oil, and also what pressure put on political parties to start to readdress this huge investment in what could possibly be something, a failed investment that the working people, as you rightly put, will pick up the pieces for. Yes, I think I'll leave it at that question for now. Just what can we do really with the political and with the population in terms of raising away against this oil production, especially that it's already started producing. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a key question, and thank you very much for asking it. You go in the market and you speak to the average person, and they will tell you plain and straight, they know they're not going to get any money. So the idea that oil will make Guyana rich, yeah, that's something that the politicians say, that's something that the business sector perhaps believes because they will see something. But basically, people in Guyana, a lot of people in Guyana simply do not believe that they are going to benefit anyway. Remember, we've seen this before. This is a very rich country. We have absolutely everything. This is one of the richest countries on the planet. But the people are poor because these resources have been mishandled time and time and time again. And that is going to keep on happening. The difference is that oil is worse. There's not a single country on this planet that has handled its oil well, except for Norway, which has got $1 trillion sovereign wealth trust fund, but they got that at the price of future generations because they have loaded the atmosphere with excessive greenhouse gases. So leaving aside Norway, which has handled its oil wealth very well, nowhere else. The Netherlands gave us the concept of Dutch disease. The United States has had endless problems in its foreign policy because so much of what it does is about energy security depending on oil, which has led to various military actions that have been utterly self-defeating and eye-watering levels of debt. If you go and look at comparable countries, so well, just look at our brothers and sisters next door in Venezuela if you want to see what oil does to a country. So I don't think that there is in country the amount of pro-oil feeling that there might appear from outside. And certainly if you pick up the independent press, by which I mean the Kaichua News and the Stavrik News, you will see a lot of criticism about the oil. But you asked what can be done, what is to be done. I think one of the things, first of all, is to get people to understand that they don't have to put up with this. They don't have to put up with being exploited by oil companies. We have very strong laws in Guyana that can be used to correct some of what is going on. When you look at that contract, the petroleum agreements between the three oil companies, Esso, Hess, and CNOOC, Exxon subsidiaries, and the minister, the government of Guyana, there are elements of that contract where one would have good grounds for going to court to say the minister didn't have the legal authority to do this. And I know that Raymond Gaskin, for example, has said repeatedly that he would like to challenge the contract. If you look at the environmental permits, there are grounds for challenging them. If you look at the petroleum production licenses, there are grounds for challenging them. If you look at anything that is being done now, there are grounds to go to court and challenge it. In my opinion, for example, the flaring of the billions of cubic feet of associated natural gas, I've said in public, I think that that was illegal and that the Environmental Protection Agency should have shut down the operations rather than allowing Esso to continue to extract oil with equipment that Esso said was faulty. They admitted their equipment was faulty. At the same time, incidentally, they told their shareholders that they were getting oil out of Guyana ahead of schedule and under budget. So there needs to be a much stronger enforcement of the existing regulatory framework. I'm not suggesting we bring in any new laws. What I'm saying is what we have, that's what people should be using right now to put a stop to some of the most exploitative behavior.
Okay, great, thanks. I'd like to open the floor now for questions from people, and Steve, if you could maybe unmute people or mute people and give them a chance to question, or if there's any in the chat, if you can bring that to my attention so we can put it to Melinda. Not right now, to see if there's some questions.
Can I just say, if anyone wants to speak, probably the best thing to do is if you click on participants, you will see at the bottom the chance to raise your hand. If you do that, a little blue hand comes up and Luke can see that you want to raise your hand if he's got his participant screen open. If you want to speak, you have to unmute yourself. I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself, which is in the bottom little left-hand corner. Can I just make a point while I've got the floor? Sorry to butt in.
Yes. Okay. That's okay, Steve. Just to let you know, there's quite a few hands up, but please make your point. And
okay. Well,
those questions.
You deal with everyone else first, then. That's fair.
No, I wasn't meaning to cut you. No, please. No, you make your point now.
Well, the only point I really wanted to make was that living in an imperialist country, it seems a bit strong for us to tell people in Guyana to leave the oil in the ground while we haven't managed to stop our own government allowing fracking here. So I think, one of the things that we need to do, and partly out of solidarity with the people of Guyana, in fact, is to actually oppose fracking Britain. For me, the main enemy is at home on this one. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe, I don't know if, Melinda, do you want to comment on that or reply to anything there?
Absolutely. We often get this, actually, in the sense that people who are politically conscious are very careful not to interfere in other people's countries. And so, Steve, thank you for that intervention. What I would say, however, is this. We are already under pressure from people outside to do oil. We're on the British government is extremely pro Guyana doing oil, so they're putting pressure on us to do oil. The Canadian government, and there's a question in here, what can the Canadian Guyanese do? The Canadian government is putting pressure on Guyana to do oil. The Canadian High Commissioner used Canadian taxpayers' money to pay for Alison Redford's who was the premier in Alberta, I think, the disgraced premier of Alberta, to come to Guyana, and she very quickly approved the third well, the Payar development project, against the wishes of the people in Guyana. So we are already under pressure from foreign governments to do oil, because as their oil industries begin to have difficulties, begin to go under, begin to need support, now they look to Guyana as a frontier country to keep themselves going. So
Yeah.
it's too much for us to push back on absolutely everything. And so my suggestion here is push back against your own government from interfering in Guyana. Leave us the space to unite, to develop our own consensus on what it needs to happen, but stop your government from coming in and telling us that we must do oil.
Yeah, thanks for that, Melinda. I think, it's clear when you said what was going to be the benefit for the average Guyanese in terms of jobs and so on. And we see already the multinationals lining up to invade Guyana, as it were. And we hear talk of golf courses and of course, those will be followed by the gambling dens. And we know, what kind of things are associated around those in terms of drugs, prostitution, and other things that will be detrimental to the Guyanese communities. So thanks for that. Now I'll go through this, the hands up as I saw them come up. And the first one was up is Dennis. So Dennis, if you can unmute and make a contribution or put your question to Melinda.
Okay, Belinda, greetings. That was a very broad but important presentation. Apart from being astounded as to how such a lopsided deal could come about, and are you able to explain how that is? The question now is that, as you have said, the oil is there. What can be done? That's my question.
So
Okay, thanks very much, Dennis. Melinda?
Yes, thank you very much, Dennis. It's a really good question. How did Guyana end up with such a lopsided deal? I cannot give you any information whatsoever as to how Guyana ended up with such a lopsided deal, but I will share with you a comment that was made by the Transparency Institute Guyana, Inc. I think it was last year or the year before. They wrote in the newspaper, and they said that the petroleum agreement between the government of Guyana and these three oil companies was the result either of grand incompetence or grand corruption.
I know which I would vote for in terms of grand corruption. Let me go to the next speaker, Dennis Chabral, if you can unmute and put your question to Melinda.
Ms. Janki, Dennis Chabral here. I'm just trying to ascertain, aside from all of the criticism you've made of the Exxon deal, etc., could you say concretely and in detail what would you recommend Guyana to do in light of the fact that Guyana does not have the technology or the capital to explore and extract the oil? What are your detailed suggestions or recommendations that we do with the oil?
Dennis, how nice to see you, and thank you for that question. And I mean, I'm saying how nice to see you, but I can't actually see you because your camera is off. And thank you for that question. But you know already my views on this, which is that the oil is going to make Guyana poorer, not richer, and therefore Guyana should not do it. That we are going to end up with stranded fossil fuel assets, which will burden this country for generations to come. Therefore, we should not do it. That the environmental costs to Guyana are enormous. I didn't even touch on, I mean, I just barely touched on those. I didn't even go into the current damage that is going on from the dumping of chemicals to produced water, the flaring and so on, all of those things are a cost that the Guyanese people bear, not the oil companies, and therefore we should not be doing it. I would like also, since you've given me the opportunity, to point out the risk of a well blowout, such as the Macondo well blowout, which killed millions of animals and ultimately resulted in a cost of about 68 billion US dollars. So while I think your question is a very good one about what one can do, my own view, and I've said this so many times now, is that Guyana should not be doing this oil. It's too risky for Guyana. It will leave Guyana poorer, not richer. It will burden the people with massive debt, not massive wealth. AIFA has already said that after the first 5 years, Guyana will owe the oil companies 20 billion US dollars, which of course is going to come out of future oil revenues. So I want to make it absolutely clear, that's not money that Guyana has to find to pay in 5 years' time. It's a debt that's racked up that comes out of future oil revenues. And as that is paid off, the rest of the debts continue to rack up. So that by the time there's any real money for Guyana, it's further down the line at a time when the oil market is even smaller. Remember, the oil market is shrinking, right? ExxonMobil's share price has halved in the last couple of years. They're a much smaller company than they were even 5 years ago. They've been kicked out of the Dow Jones. This is not a sector that is growing. This is not a sector to base a country's future on. So in response to your question, Dennis, I would say Guyana should extricate itself from this disastrous deal, disastrous economically, disastrous financially, disastrous environmentally. And let's not forget that oil also imposes a rule of law cost on a country, a political cost. We saw that last year. When people voted, every single vote in our election was counted. And then we had a problem because one party would not accept the results. And we had 5 months where the country was united that it would not accept a result that was not the result of the election. We were very clear. Whoever we voted for, irrespective of who we voted for, the election results had to be respected. But why the delay of 5 months? Because of this promise, this anticipation of oil money, which will not materialize. So oil is very dangerous for a country. We are not ready for it. We'll never be ready for it. And the costs are too big for Guyana, economically, financially, environmentally, and as I just mentioned, also in terms of the rule of law.
You talked about exiting the deal. Are you saying exiting? Are you saying exit this particular deal or overall oil in total?
Sorry, you want to repeat your question, Dennis?
No, Ms. Janki, you said you talked about exiting this deal. Or are you saying exit oil production in total, regardless of whichever company comes in?
Did you get that, Melinda? Yeah. Good.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that oil is too expensive for Guyana to do. And therefore, we should not be doing oil. How we get to the stage of not doing oil is something that needs far more discussion, analysis, evidence than I can give you in this sort of engagement. But the bottom line, the principle is that in 2021, it makes absolutely no sense economically, financially, environmentally for Guyana to begin to do oil and to enter this market. So that is the premise, that is the principle. What we then do in order to save Guyana from the financial, economic, and environmental disaster represented by oil, that's a much, much bigger question, and not a question where I can give you a sensible answer in the time that's available.
And thanks to that, Melinda. I think it's definitely one of the questions we will discuss at our executive, probably at our next meeting. Now I've got one hand up in the chat. And so now is the time for you to think of your question that you want to put to Melinda if you want to get in there. The next person up with a question is Gerard Kreft. Gerard, can you unmute and put your question to Melinda?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. What basically, Melinda, thank you for the good presentation. I would just like to emphasize a small comment that basically Exxon needs Guyana oil more than Guyana needs Exxon, because it's basically right now a case of the tail wagging the dog. And if this does move ahead, you're going to see also that I think you're going to see Guyana oil now or in the future being viewed as a stranded asset. So the billions of the so-called pot of gold that Guyana is being promised is an illusion of the worst sort.
Good. Thank you. Melinda, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's I just want to thank you, Gerard, because I think that encapsulates beautifully what I was probably taking far too many words to say, that the illusion that this oil wealth is in fact an illusion, and the risks of stranded fossil fuel assets are something the country has to bear. And just to go back to Dennis's point, I think we need to, that's one of the things I would suggest is factored in right now by the government of Guyana and by the people of Guyana. Yeah. And incidentally, Gerard didn't mention it, but he wrote an excellent article on Guyana's oil. And if you just Google it, I think it's extremely well worth everyone's while to have a look at it and read it.
Thank you.
I don't know if Gerard could put maybe if you could put the link in the chat, that would be great.
Okay, let me see what I can do.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, there are no more hands at the moment, but I'm sure there's a lot more questions that can be put to you, Melinda, but I will wait to see if any more hands appear or give them a little bit more time. Sometimes people are shy to come forward with a question. I didn't see a hand put up.
Yeah, my hand
is up. My hand's not working. Okay, your hand not working. Can you raise it? Let me see. Okay, Sally will be on next after you, so you get a chance. Go ahead, Frank. You can put your question to Melinda.
Yes, yes, that was very enlightening, Melinda, and you've really burst my bubbles, because my last trip to Guyana, I actually tried to visit as many places as I could, and I realized that this infrastructure, our infrastructure, really needs building up. And I'm saying we do need. I'm looking around to see, as you said, there's 83,000 square miles. There's only 780,000 people. Not all of them are working. I don't know what percentage of that is in work. So I'm saying that the cost of for Guyana's infrastructure now has to be borne by only a tiny part of the population. And I was thinking to myself, what we do need is surplus money. I thought this surplus money was going to come from the oil. So what does Guyana do? What is the future for Guyana if there's no oil? Because it's really there is a lot that Guyana needs to at least catch up. We're not even playing catch up. What do we do if we can't use the oil money is no good to us?
Okay,
thank you. I love this question, and it's one that people often want to ask, but they're a bit too shy to ask. Thank you, Frank. I think it's a great question. So yeah, when you go through Guyana, of course, you want to go south, you want to go into the interior, you want to go to the Rupert, and there's one road, one red road, and your chances of getting stuck in the mud somewhere, that can be quite high. If you want to go into the interior, really you have to fly. The country is not well connected. And there's so much physical infrastructure that simply isn't there. Now, let's look at it from a different point of view. Not what we don't have, but what we do have. We have more than 80% of the country covered in forest, which takes out more greenhouse gases than the country produces. Right now, under the Paris Agreement, everybody is scrambling to become carbon neutral by 2030 or 2040 or 2050. They don't know, they can't make up their mind because they can't do it. We are not carbon neutral. We are carbon negative. If every single one of those countries was like Guyana, we would not have a problem with global warming. Right now, the Guyanese people should be paid for that carbon that they are taking out of the atmosphere, because every single day of Guyana's existence, we are helping this planet to survive. The way we live is enabling everybody else to breathe. That's got to be worth more than any amount of infrastructure. Let's look at the ocean. We're a small country, but we do have this big exclusive economic zone. Sorry, I'm here getting a lot of interference. Sorry, could you mute?
Can somebody turn off the music?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, so we have this carbon sink service, as it were. I mean, I don't like to use economic terms because, quite frankly, when you take an economics perspective, you end up in the mess we're in, which is why Nick Stern, who the former World Bank economist, said climate change is the biggest market failure the world has ever seen. This whole idea of development, progress, etc., is the problem. GDP growth is the conversion of everything that is alive and beautiful into numbers in a spreadsheet. We don't want to go that way. So we should be paid for the carbon that we take out of the atmosphere. Secondly, with all of the marine resources that Guyana has, very easy, convert that into a marine protected area and use that as income. You don't need much money for 780,000 people to be extremely rich. You really don't need that much income. But there is one constraint that I want to mention, and to my mind, this is the biggest constraint of all in the country. We have the biggest brain drain on the planet. Within 1 year of graduation, 87% of our graduates leave, and they continue to leave, and they leave every year. And every year we have another bunch coming out, and very soon after that, they've gone. Imagine what your countries would be like if 87% of the graduates left. That is really what is draining Guyana. And if you want to know the impact of politics on Guyana, it is summed up by that one statistic, that our bright young people feel there is no future for them in Guyana because of the stranglehold that the two political parties have on the future of Guyana. I know I don't ever use the word development because I think it's a very dangerous word that has been used to hide a great deal of social, environmental, financial, and economic destruction, and that the oil, when we talk about oil development, that is exactly what we're talking about, the destruction. So to come back to this, we are an extremely rich country, and we need to find better, smarter, wiser, and more equal ways of dealing with our wealth, so that every single person in Guyana can live a decent life, physically safe, and live the best kind of life that it's possible to live in a country that is so rich.
Yeah, I must agree with you there, Melinda, because I think one of the areas, and for some time, Guyana was often seen as the breadbasket of the Caribbean. And it's shocking that the Caribbean actually imports something like 5 billion in food every year. As ridiculous amount of sum of money being spent. We need to diversify and look for other ways that are more in keeping with protecting the environment and so on, that we can produce food for the region. Okay, we've got 3 questions up. I'll go in the order that they have appeared. And the first up is Sally Gibson. Then we've got Trevor Baird. And then there's a question from Michael Madio, which I will put to you. So we'll take those three now, and if other questions appear, we'll see how much time we can do them in. So the first person, Sally Gibson, if you can. All right, you're already unmuted.
I'm unmute, yeah. Hi, Melinda. I think you answered my question in the last answer you gave. I was going to ask you, given that, Guyana has the oil resources, and the people of Guyana, have a difficult life. What does success look like to you for the people? You've mentioned, I think, what you're saying is get paid for the carbon sink and use and get money from the marine resources. That requires some sort of catalyst for change, doesn't it? I mean, how do you see that being implemented, given that we are in the current situation we are in, which is the oil is being produced? It's not easy to transition from that. I mean, the whole world is in transition at the moment. However, oil still remains part of the energy mix and will be part of the energy mix in at least until 2035, if not beyond. So it doesn't just come off the table. So be interested to hear how you think that the better world for the people of Guyana can come about.
Yeah, good question. So oil will remain part of the energy mix, but the fact is it's a declining market, and under no circumstances should any government bank a country's future on a declining market. The IMF produced a paper a couple of years ago saying that for oil exporting countries, the most important thing to do now, the most important policy decision, was to diversify away from oil. Now, if the IMF working paper is saying diversify away from oil, I think they can make much better economic arguments against oil than I can. Or I could refer you to a recent report. It came out last year by Joseph Stiglitz and Nick Stern from the Grantham Institute at the London School of Economics. So, extremely high quality analysis, research, and evidence. And their basic message is, look, if you want to build up your economy now, do it through renewable energy. So when you've got the best sort of economic analysis saying the market is telling you go renewable energy, that ought to be a serious warning for the Guyanese people that trying to do oil doesn't benefit Guyana. And in fact, to come back to Jared Cruz's point, this is really the tail wagging the dog. This is for the benefit of Exxon. This is not for the benefit of Guyana. So I think once you see that oil is not for the benefit of Guyana, then the energy has to move from, well, how do we make the best of the oil, to, whoa, how do we protect the country and the people that we love? How do we protect the country that we love? How do we protect one another? Because we are one people, we are one nation, we have one destiny. People get very annoyed when I say the national motto because they think it's political, but it's right there. And that is who we are. So it's a different question to my mind. It's how do we protect Guyana from oil?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah,
thank you. I'd like to before I go on to Michael, Trevor, you will get a chance to put your question now, and then I would like for Paul Ward, who's in Jamaica, I think. I'm not sure at the moment, but Paul, if you can give us a little short report, we'll give Melinda a break and we'll come back to the oil question shortly after. So Paul, just giving you a few minutes to prepare there. So if we can have Trevor, if you can unmute and put your question to Melinda now.
Hi.
Come on, yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Melinda, for the insightful presentation. My question comes back to the assertion that the majority of the working class people in Guyana do not feel they have a great stake in the oil and that they wouldn't benefit. I agree with that assertion, one, and at the same time, we know that the past governments have been aggressively pursuing oil and perpetuating a rhetoric that it is good. And at this point, the call for leaving oil in the ground or not pursuing it, in some ways might seem to be a sort of a political suicide and almost unthinkable for Guyanese, even though we don't believe that we have such a great stake. So do you think then, if taking oil off the table is a grand task and might not seem possible, do you think that we should pursue different economic policies in terms of getting people to perhaps direct cash disbursements or something like that, that the average Guyanese person feel that they have benefited or they will be benefiting from the oil?
Thank you. If I could just summarize the theme of this that I've been saying, and I think Travon, you've raised some really critical issues here, and I want to thank you because this is something that comes up from time to time that we have to address. I think the key issue, first of all, is that I'm not going to make any of these decisions. These have to be decisions that are made by the people on an informed basis. So there needs to be a national consensus. It's fine. I can say what I think, and I can do everything that is within my power as a lawyer to protect Guyana. So, for example, we mentioned the litigation earlier. I think it's critical to tell people the truth about oil. And that's why I mentioned also the problem that we have with people telling lies to the Guyanese people. So, you know, the whole global witness fiasco. So the first thing I think is before we rush to find answers, the really critical thing is for everyone to understand what oil means for Guyana, what it means economically, what this deal means financially for the people, what this deal means for the environment. And then people are in a position to say, yes, I still think it's worth it. I'm prepared to jeopardize my children's future and my grandchildren's future for a few $100 million now. They're perfectly entitled to say that. Or they might say, no, I don't agree with that at all. I think actually what we should be doing is building a green economy, building a blue economy, and looking to the future, because this planet is facing this sixth mass extinction, and I want my children and my grandchildren to live on a planet that sustains them. So Guyana is rich in biodiversity. That's one thing we should factor in. So there's a whole range of things that could happen. I'm not going to be the person that decides what happens, but I'm going to be one of the people that puts forward ideas that can be discussed. In terms of what people should do now, I think that's fairly clear. Where I said earlier that there are grounds for stopping unlawful action, I think it's really important that people actually go to court and challenge behavior that appears to be unlawful. Democracy is not simply you put an X against somebody's name and then somebody goes and sits in Parliament. Democracy is an ongoing struggle every single day against the abuse of power. And one of the ways in which everybody can push back against the abuse of power is to say no to unlawful activity. To say no to unlawful activity publicly as advocates for the rule of law, and to say no to unlawful activity where possible by actually being public interest litigants and going to court. So I think you can't have an oil sector that has illegality in it, because by definition, what you're doing is undermining the country. So it's a non-negotiable that everything that is illegal needs to be stopped. And I think everybody in Guyana can unite on that. And that's, I mean, we have a people's movement, a fair deal for Guyana, a fair deal for the planet. And that movement says the oil companies and the government of Guyana must obey the laws of Guyana. And in particular, of course, protect the environment for present and future generations, which is not some green tree hugging thing that people think it is, but is actually Article 149J of the Constitution, because without the environment, people cannot survive. And that's why Article 36 of the Constitution says the well-being of the nation depends on clean air, clean water, biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, and so on. So I think that's where the consensus is coming, and that's where the movement and the joint action has to come, starting with first principles, not thinking, well, how do we make the most of this, but what is the best thing for us?
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Paul, now usually we do include the whole region in our discussions, and unfortunately, Paul, I forgot you at the beginning of the session to give you the opportunity to say what's happening in Jamaica. So I hope you'll use this opportunity now. This is not a question, I hope, to Melinda, as she might just need to catch her breath a minute, and then we'll come back to oil. Thank you, Paul, if you can just speak to us.
Sure. Yeah, hi, everybody. Yeah, I actually do have two questions for Melinda, but I'll leave them till I said something about Jamaica. You know, interesting that we're discussing these topics today, because here in Jamaica in November, we had quite a controversy regarding some mining of limestone on the north coast, along the tourist strip, in fact. The National Environmental Protection Agency decided it should not go ahead. But the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, with his now 2/3 majority after the election in September, he actually overruled NEPA. At the moment, it's all a bit in abeyance, but the same kind of arguments are coming up about who would benefit in the longer term. And it also linked to corruption, because the people who wanted to do the mining had connections with the ruling party going way back. And so a lot of people feel there's a corruption in it, as well as a blindness to the damage it would do. And that actually links to still an ongoing debate here about bauxite mining. And a new concession is supposed to be started soon on the edge of the cockpit country, and there's great concern about that they're gaining a thin end of another wedge, mining out even more of the cockpit country. And as we've heard from Melinda, the people who pay the price for the limited benefits, you know, the people who live in the area. There's some farmers recently very much complaining that you know, they've been told to move, they've been told they will get decent land as a replacement, but that really doesn't happen. And even now, with children trying to do their schoolwork at home, apparently there's so much noise and dust that the children can't even do their noise, they can't do their work. So there are winners and losers, but a lot of people do lose out, and some people pay the price for perhaps some limited benefit. So the interesting link with the oil in Guyana, and I'm glad to hear about the parallels.
Good.
In terms of other things that go on, the 2/3 majority in the Parliament is a bit worrying. To some extent protected by the higher house, the upper house, but it still links to the feeling of wholeness in terms of that same limestone mining overruling. Another example is our parliamentary committees. There's been a tradition that most of them should be chaired by the opposition. But again, that has been now challenged and being changed by the Prime Minister, so that the chairmanship would be in the ruling party, which is it's not good for the future, not good for democracy. A comment in terms of China and America and Jamaica's relationship with China. A lot of us do have worries Jamaica has become too reliant on China. But in the news this week, the outgoing US ambassador is again criticizing Jamaica for getting too close to China. Now, some of us actually sort of might agree with it. But again, you know, Americans interfering in other people's business. But we don't really get much open, challenging comment for the Prime Minister. I mean, I may be wrong, but I'm disappointed because I've not seen our Prime Minister make any comment on the nonsense that Donald Trump and his supporters got up to this week. There was an expression of concern by the Foreign Minister, but concern could mean anything. So again, a little disappointed on that score. In terms of the crime situation in Jamaica is still not going in the right direction. And this last week, again, the Prime Minister seems to be appealing to the churches and prayer to try and help the situation, which again seems to, for many of us, to be a mission of failure. Just a couple more things. In terms of the uneven hand that COVID is created for many people across the world. There was a case 2 weeks ago around the Christmas time where, because obviously in Jamaica we have limitations on gatherings, social gatherings, and people have been ordinary folks have been rather roughly treated when they don't stick to the rules. But 2 weeks ago there was a meeting, if you like, of people, the wealthy in Jamaica, who have a little island called Maiden Key off the coast of Kingston that they like to go to with their boats. And there were many of them. And people saying, hey, come on, this is not fair. And of course they were treated with, you know, velvet gloves when they were asked to desist, unlike people downtown who are trying to even make a living and get by and get rough treatment. And the last thing again is in terms of COVID and schools and education, is coming out, of course, that it's very divisive here, of course. You know, children from less wealthy families, even if they do get a device, they can't get internet. And so the unevenness in terms of what children are getting in terms of education is getting worse and worse. And the ministry don't seem to be very realistic about doing something about it. We really only have one internet provider here now. And there's no figures come out about how they're supposed to be improving access to Jamaicans. Because without that, I'm not even sure how the situation will improve, perhaps until the pandemic subsides to some extent. Anyway, before I'm just about finished with that, but I do want to have a couple of questions for Linda when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. And I'm sure you'll write something for Cutlass so we can put that in our journal so that people can be updated. You mentioned the crime and COVID. COVID is a real problem over here in school, and it's something that's shared. You know, it's not only in the region, but also up in the metropole, as it were. And also, you're a little bit disturbed at what's happening in Parliament with the majority government wanting to chair every department of government and departing from what is the custom. I think we see where that can lead to when you had somebody like Trump in America trying to take control and rule by decree. So thank you for your report. We won't have time to take questions from people on anything that you mentioned, but that's there. Thanks. I'll just put a question now. There's another hand up. I think Dennis Bartholomew's hand is up here. But before I come, Dennis, I think, did you want to say something, Paul? Okay. There was a question that was being put.
Melinda, if I could.
Melinda. Okay, you might as well. Okay, can you do your short questions now? I see Melinda is back.
Sorry, Luke.
Might as well take this time. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, two very short questions. bearing in mind partly what I've said about
Paul,
Jamaica
Paul,
and mining bauxite and limestone, are there any of the, sorry, were you asking me to, sorry, Luke?
to speak up just a little bit, I think your broadband width is a bit low, and so it's hard hearing you. So if you can just shout your questions to Melinda.
It is certainly very often a problem. I'm glad you heard me before if you did. In terms of possibly exploiting other minerals in Guyana, I mean, as we know, and as you said, Guyana is very rich in all kinds of minerals and not just oil. Are there any other minerals that you think could be extracted that could be of benefit to the people and the environment? And my second question really was in terms of the possible, as it should be, payment for Guyana being a carbon sink. I mean, I feel the same about Brazil, to be honest with you. I think if there'd been some world justice on that issue from a long time, Brazil may not be in the situation it's in today. Do you see any future in Guyana and Brazil even being paid for being a carbon sink?
Thank you, Paul. Did you get the questions, Melinda?
I think so. So in terms of the first one about other minerals, the short answer to that is that I don't know. And to be honest, my concern right now is that oil is going to make Guyana poorer, not richer, and therefore the first thing to be done is to protect Guyana and the working people of Guyana from exploitation. In terms of the carbon sink, again, I can't really comment on Brazil, but as far as Guyana is concerned, with our I think we're the second most highly forested country on the planet. And that's important because when I say forest, of course, I'm talking about the original forests, which are rich in biodiversity. I'm not talking about plantation forests, which are really deserts of trees. And that's what you get, for example, in Scandinavia, where, people will say, oh, but we've got all these trees that we've planted. It doesn't quite work like that. So the key is to protect forests such as Guyana's, and an easy way to do it is to link it to the extraction of carbon dioxide, but really we should be paid also for the biodiversity. All of this has come about because modern economics is insane and does not value anything unless it's been converted into something else. So standing trees currently have no value, when obviously they should. So the destruction of the environment is normally seen as an externality, and that needs to be corrected. We not only need to put the brakes on, we need to turn around and go in the opposite direction. And there's now a whole movement in economics for natural capital, which is becoming more and more fashionable. I just want to point out that Article 36 of the Guyana Constitution, which is really a statement of natural capital, has been in there since about 2003, and that the Environmental Protection Act, which we passed in 1996, requires Guyana's Environmental Protection Agency to create accounts of natural capital, which they're not doing, incidentally. So Guyana is already well ahead of the rest of the world in terms of what's there. That's what we should be using. Those are the principles we should be applying. And then we can factor in these other things about infrastructure, minerals, et cetera, but get the basics right, which is that the environment has a value that is not being taken into account at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Melinda. And of course, the other mineral that is being extracted at great length in Guyana is gold. And we know that is already creating a lot of environmental damage in the riverbeds and in the rivers. And we know most of it gets exported one way or the other, that wealth does not reside with us in Guyana. But the question I'd like to put to you now from Michael Madio, which is, what about the Suriname deal? Why are they more successful? I know this is not covering Guyana, but you might want to touch on that just slightly. Our neighbor Suriname seems to be better, Mike thinks.
And again, I don't know why Suriname negotiated the particular deal that they did, and whether it's I mean, people say that it's better. My own view is that for any country to start doing oil production in 2021 is actually a very foolish thing to do. And so Suriname is going to pay a price as well. It's not that Guyana got, I mean, if you say, well, Suriname got a better deal, it suggests that it's possible to get a good deal. I disagree. I do not think that there is any way to begin to do oil in 2021 and that be a benefit for the country. So I keep coming back to this point that oil will make Guyana poorer, not richer.
Great. Thank you very much. The next one up is Dennis. Dennis, if you can unmute and
Okay.
put your question again.
Okay, Melinda. I've got two questions, but first of all, I would just like to reinforce what you say, in that when you look at the third world countries, or the majority of third world countries who have discovered or exploited oil, Angola, Venezuela, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, perhaps even Trinidad and Tobago, and perhaps even us here in the United Kingdom, the oil does not appear to have had any long-lasting benefit to the ordinary people or to the country at all. But moving on to my question, what are the effects of this national debt bondage that Guyana is foisting upon itself? And my second question is this, it's a personal one. What you're saying appears to be things which a lot of people with power in Guyana, a lot of people in Guyana may not like. Are you concerned as to your personal safety?
So the first question I didn't quite catch. What was the first question again?
What is the effect, the long-term effect of this national debt bondage that Guyana has foisted upon itself?
So debt is always a problem, and it burdens future generations. And I think that what we really need to do now is to have Guyana's economists and financial planners and so on actually explaining to people in Guyana what it means. I'm not an economist, and I wouldn't want people to look to me for any kind of advice on economics. But I think there is a role here for example, the University of Guyana Green Institute, which is led by Dr. Thomas Singh, who's an economist, and this would be a very rich area of research for them to do. And these things must be done in country. We want to see our own indigenous economics research being done rather than always listening to experts from outside. It's good to have experts from outside to give us independent financial analysis, independent economic analysis, and so on, but we mustn't be dependent on that. We must build up our own in-country expertise. So the second question, Guyana as a democracy. I would urge you, for example, to go and look at some of the YouTube videos where people speak very freely about, excuse me, about what is going on in Guyana. And I would encourage everybody to speak out, to join this debate, to discuss what is going on, to share their views, because that's the way also in which a democracy becomes stronger. Democracy isn't everybody agrees with one another. That's usually totalitarianism. Democracy is a rich debate, it's discussion, it's ideas, it's disagreement, it's learning, it's working things out, it's shifting your position, it's getting to know people better, it's talking to them on the seawall, in the market, in the National Library when we do presentations. It's meeting people on the street. That's what makes a rich democracy. And that sort of thing is priceless. And that's why it's important that everybody does it, that everybody in Guyana becomes more aware of the oil, understands better the economic, the financial, the environmental, and the social costs, the hidden costs, as well as the actual costs of this oil, so that we can build a national consensus and stop this top-down thing of, well, our leaders know best. Our leaders don't know best. I don't even like the term our leaders. I prefer the term the people who we have put into Parliament in order to look after our interests and to serve us. I think that's a much better description for them.
You're muted, Luke.
Myself then. Okay, thank you for. I was just calling on Steve to be around and be alert, because I think we're out of questions there now. People can look at the chat. Oh, a couple of hands have popped up. So we'll give them a chance for a couple of minutes, because we close in about 10 minutes. But I'll come back to Karina Sharples. You haven't had a chance to speak yet. So Karina, can you unmute and speak?
Yes, thank you, Luke. Hi, Melinda. Thanks for the presentation. It's good to see you again. Yeah, I just wanted to, you mentioned about the sponsorship and donations and how that could be recouped as part of the costs. I know the contract says something like costs were recoverable with the approval of a minister. Do you think that's just a formality, that those donations will be approved? And also, I just wondered if you have any insight or thoughts into the impact of like those high rents and costs for oil workers, what impact that's having on ordinary people in terms of things like rent, cost of food, things like that. Is that something you're concerned about as well?
Okay, hi Karina, nice to hear from you. I hope all is well. Yeah, two very good questions, and I'm not sure that I'm really the person to answer. In terms of the high costs of the rent and increasing costs and so on, of course that's always going to be a bad thing, apart from except for the people who are renting their houses at higher rents, and except for the people who are bringing in the food and making more profit. I think one of the things that we're doing here, though, is perhaps losing sight of the real costs to Guyana and the real exploitation of people. And if I could just go back for a moment to the tax, Exxon and Co. They don't pay any tax, but the Guyanese do. I remember now. Someone asked me about cash transfers. Look, the thing I would always say is you've got to get the basics right. And that means you should not be taxing people before they can survive, before they can live a decent life. And poor people in Guyana, powerless people, working people are being taxed long before they are taking home enough money to enable them to lead decent lives. And I would include in that the cost of educating their children, somewhere decent to live, all of the things that you and I and everybody else wants to have. And there is absolutely no reason why, if you are Guyanese, you can't have those things, because the country is rich. So the issue here is mismanagement of the resources. So in a way, when we're talking about the contract and so on, we're moving too far away from the issue. On your point about the donations and so on, the contract says that Exxon can pretty much, Esso, I keep saying it's Exxon, Esso and the other oil companies, there are just pages and pages and pages and pages of things that they can deduct. And I've put into the chat the presentation that I did at Moray House on the costs that can be deducted. And there appears to be no limits to those. So yes, they can get it back. And if you had listened to the presentation, the panel discussion on the 31st of December, which included Tom Sanzillo from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, Valerie Marcel from Chatham House, and David Patterson, the shadow minister now on oil, and myself, you would also hear quite a lot of discussion on the costs that Guyana is going to bear, and the hesitation in relation to oil. And I seem to recall that Dr. Marcel herself pointed out that oil doesn't really have a long-term future. And that's the issue that we need to face up to. Can't make it any better. We have to face up to the fact there is no long-term future, and therefore to minimize the damage to Guyana and to protect the Guyanese people.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Luke? Yes. Is
Yes.
that, are we getting towards the end of the meeting now?
Yes, yes. If I can just start to sum up a little bit and wrap up. Thank you, Steve. Thanks. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the meeting, especially for the questions that have been put to Melinda. I think they were very rich and very exciting questions in many ways, and Paul for your report in Jamaica and updating us. But I wanted to especially thank Melinda for what has been a very persuasive argument against oil. It's very clear that oil is not only damaging for Guyana, but for the world and for the environment. We need to shift away from the idea that somehow, which I also held, knowing that there are many people in Guyana who were poverty stricken and felt that oil would be the answer to their problems. Not completely trusting the politicians would deliver, of course, but that actually oil is bad for Guyana at this stage. And I think you've shifted, hopefully not only my perception, but others. And I wanted to thank you for that, because I think it's really important that we do not only the best for Guyana, but for the world. And it's clear that oil will not bring riches, but bring lots of other problems to Guyana, apart from the flooding in Georgetown and on the coastland. But the social issues and problems that comes with it, and the inequality that will continue to rise, giving us even more problems for the future. So thank you very much for that. And if you want to say any closing remarks, Melinda, will give you the opportunity. But once more, thank you very much for appearing on our program. You can unmute and just, if you want to say a few words in closing, Melinda.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody. I'm not going to say anything else because I've talked so much already, and I have actually been known to talk for 3 days non-stop, but I won't do that here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Steve, for running things so smoothly. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Been amazing.
Bye, Luke. Thank you. Thanks, Melinda.
Okay, Mohammed. Okay. Bye. Great. Oh, there's David. David appeared. David, you're there. Good.
Great meeting.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I should have reminded people that the next meeting will be going back to the usual first Sunday of the month. But you'll get a notice coming out, no doubt.